She ran. In front of 300 witnesses, Evelyn Carter lifted her skirts and bolted from the altar, destroying her family's name, her future, and every rule society had carved into her bones. 3 years later, she thought she'd escaped. She was wrong. The man she humiliated just bought every piece of land around hers. Now she's trapped, isolated, watched, and he's coming. But what she doesn't know, what no one knows, is that he's not her enemy. He's the only thing standing between her and the wolves circling closer every night. Stay until the end to see what happens when pride, fear, and the truth collide in a storm that will either kill them both or set them free. Drop a comment with your city so I know where you're watching from, and hit that like button if you love a story where courage costs everything. Evelyn Carter's hands were shaking, and she hated herself for it. She stood at the tall windows of Ashford Manor's East Parlor, watching the carriages arrive in polished waves, each one more ornate than the last. Her wedding day, the day her mother had planned for 2 years, the day her father had negotiated like a business contract, the day that would seal the Carter name back into respectability after her older brother's gambling debts had nearly sunk them all. And she felt nothing but cold dread. "Stop fidgeting with the lace, Evelyn." Her mother's voice sliced through the room like a blade wrapped in silk. Margaret Carter swept in, all rigid posture and calculated grace, her eyes scanning Evelyn's dress with the precision of a jeweler appraising a flawed stone. "You'll fray the edges. Do you have any idea what that lace cost?" "No, Mother." Evelyn's voice came out flat, empty. £40. £40 for Chantilly lace imported from France, because your father insisted you look the part of a proper bride, even if— Margaret stopped herself, lips pressed into a thin line. "Even if you've been nothing but trouble." The unspoken words hung in the air like smoke. Evelyn turned back to the window. The guests were gathering now, a glittering swarm of London's elite. She recognized the Ashtons, the Pembrokes, the Lancasters, all families who'd watched the Carters fall from grace with thinly veiled delight, and who would now watch her redemption with the same cruel fascination. Or her performance, rather, because that's what this was. A performance, a transaction, a sacrifice dressed up in white silk and orange blossoms. "He's here!" Her younger sister Charlotte appeared in the doorway, breathless and wide-eyed. At 16, Charlotte still believed in romance, still thought weddings were about love rather than survival. "Lord Hastings just arrived." "Oh, Evelyn, his carriage is magnificent." "Charlotte, enough." Margaret's tone could freeze water. "Go check on the flowers in the chapel. The peonies looked wilted this morning." Charlotte disappeared, and Evelyn was alone again with her mother and the suffocating weight of expectation. Lord Edmund Hastings, 43 years old, twice widowed, a man whose fortune came from coal mines and factory towns up north, whose hands were soft but whose eyes were hard. Evelyn had met him exactly 4 times before her father accepted his proposal. 4 stilted conversations in drawing rooms, 4 moments where Hastings' gaze had lingered on her face, her throat, her hands, with a possessive intensity that made her skin crawl. "He's a good match," her father had said. "Better than you deserve, frankly." "He'll provide for you," her mother had added. "Security, status, everything we're about to lose if you don't do this." And Evelyn, dutiful and desperate and terrified of being the reason her family fell apart, had said yes. But now, standing in this suffocating room with the sounds of the gathering crowd drifting up from below, she felt something shift inside her chest, a crack in the carefully constructed wall she'd built around her fear. "I need a moment alone," she said quietly. Her mother's eyes narrowed. "We don't have time for—" "One moment, please." Something in Evelyn's voice must have registered because Margaret paused, studying her daughter with an expression caught between suspicion and something almost like concern. Then she nodded, once, sharp. 5 minutes, not a second more. Your father is already positioning himself near the chapel entrance." The door closed. Silence rushed in like a wave. Evelyn sank into the chair by the vanity, her reflection staring back at her, pale face, dark eyes too large, hair pinned into an elaborate style that felt like a cage. She looked like a stranger, a doll, a pretty lie. Her hands found the edge of the vanity table and gripped hard. "You can do this," she told herself. "You have to do this." But the words felt hollow, wrong. Because the truth, the terrible truth she'd been avoiding for weeks, was simple. She didn't want this. Any of it. Not the marriage, not the life that came with it, not the version of herself she'd have to become to survive it. And worse, far worse, was the memory of the day she'd met Adrian Blackwood. It had been at a garden party 3 months ago, one of those sprawling afternoon events where London society gathered to see and be seen. Evelyn had been standing near the rose arbor, trying to escape another tedious conversation about the weather, when a man had approached her with a directness that was almost shocking. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," he'd said. She'd turned, startled, and found herself looking up at a tall man with dark hair and darker eyes, dressed simply compared to the peacocks around him. No ornate waistcoat, no flashy rings, just clean lines and an unsettling intensity. She'd fumbled for a polite response and found none. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who feels the same way. A slight smile, not quite warm but not cold either. Adrian Blackwood. Evelyn Carter. She'd offered her hand automatically, and he'd taken it with a grip that was firm without being crushing. His hands were not soft like Hastings. They were scarred, calloused, the hands of someone who worked, not just owned. "Blackwood," she'd repeated, trying to place the name. "I don't think You haven't. I don't come to London often." His gaze had been steady, unflinching, and she'd felt something strange under it, seen, in a way that made her uncomfortable and aware all at once. "I prefer the north. Fewer rules, fewer games." They'd talked for 20 minutes, maybe 30, about nothing important, travel, books, the absurdity of social rituals. But Evelyn had felt more awake during that conversation than she had in months. He hadn't flattered her, hadn't performed, had simply talked to her like she was a person rather than a prize or a problem. And when Lord Hastings had appeared to reclaim her attention, cutting into the conversation with thinly veiled irritation, Adrian had simply nodded and walked away without protest or drama, but not before locking eyes with her one last time. That look had stayed with her, haunted her. A silent question she couldn't answer. "What do you want?" A knock at the door jolted her back to the present. "It's time, Evelyn." Her father's voice, gruff and impatient. "They're waiting." She stood, smoothed her skirts, checked her reflection one last time. The girl in the mirror looked terrified. The chapel was a sea of faces, all turned toward her as she stepped through the doorway on her father's arm. The organ swelled into the bridal march, notes cascading through the vaulted space like a gilded cage closing around her. She could feel the weight of every gaze, every judgment, every expectation pressing down on her shoulders. And at the end of the aisle, waiting beside the minister, stood Lord Edmund Hastings. He was smiling, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. Her father's grip on her arm was tight, too tight, as if he sensed her hesitation and was prepared to drag her forward if necessary. Each step felt like wading through deep water, her lungs tight, her pulse hammering in her ears. "You can do this. You have to do this." But then, halfway down the aisle, she saw him, Adrian Blackwood. He was standing near the back, partially obscured by a column, dressed in dark formal wear that made him look even more out of place among the perfumed crowd. He wasn't watching her with the greedy curiosity of the others. He was simply there, steady, still. Their eyes met, and in that instant, everything crystallized with brutal clarity. She didn't love Edmund Hastings. She didn't even like him, and marrying him wouldn't save her family. It would just destroy her slowly, piece by piece, year by year, until there was nothing left of the person she'd once been. Her father's hand tightened. "Keep walking," he muttered under his breath. But Evelyn's feet had stopped moving. The music continued. The crowd began to murmur, a ripple of confusion spreading through the pews. Hastings' smile faltered. "Evelyn?" His voice carried across the chapel, sharp with authority. "Come now, don't be shy." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw her future written in his eyes. Control, ownership, a life measured out in obligations and silences and slow suffocation. Then she looked back at Adrian. He wasn't smiling, wasn't encouraging her, Wasn't doing anything except standing there, watching, waiting. But something in his expression, a kind of quiet recognition, gave her the strangest sensation. He understood. He knew what it felt like to be trapped. And he wouldn't judge her, whatever she chose to do next. "Evelyn!" Her father's hiss was venomous now. "What are you—" She pulled her arm free. The chapel went silent. "I can't do this." Her voice came out stronger than she'd expected, echoing off the stone walls. "I'm sorry. I can't." Her mother stood up from the front pew, face white with shock. "Evelyn Margaret Carter, you sit down this instant." But Evelyn was already moving. She turned, not toward the altar, but toward the door, her skirts gathered in trembling hands, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Behind her, the murmurs exploded into shocked gasps, voices rising in a cacophony of disbelief and scandal. "Stop her!" Hastings' roar cut through the chaos. "Someone stop her!" Boots! But Evelyn was running now, flying down the aisle she'd just walked, past the stunned faces, past her mother's horrified expression, past everything she'd been taught to value and fear, past Adrian Blackwood, who didn't try to stop her but simply stepped aside, his dark eyes following her with something that might have been respect. She burst through the chapel doors into blinding sunlight, stumbled down the stone steps, and kept running, across the manicured lawn, past the shocked servants, toward the line of trees at the edge of the property. Her veil tore free and sailed away like a white flag of surrender. Her carefully pinned hair came loose, tumbling around her shoulders. She didn't stop until she reached the woods, plunging into the shadows of oak and elm, branches catching at her dress, her lungs burning, tears streaming down her face. Only then did she collapse against a tree trunk, sliding down to the ground, and let herself break. What had she done? What had she done? The scandal was immediate and absolute. By nightfall, Evelyn's name was on every tongue in London. The runaway bride. The disgrace. The girl who destroyed her family's last chance at redemption and humiliated one of England's wealthiest men in front of 300 witnesses. Her father refused to speak to her. Her mother oscillated between icy silence and tearful fury. Charlotte looked at her with bewildered hurt, unable to understand why Evelyn had thrown everything away. "You've ruined us," her mother said on the third day, voice brittle with exhaustion. "Completely ruined us. Hastings has withdrawn his financial support. Your father's creditors are circling. We'll lose Ashford by the end of the month." Evelyn sat in her room, the room she'd grown up in, now feeling like a prison, and tried to feel guilty, tried to regret what she'd done. But all she felt was a strange, fragile sense of relief. She'd chosen herself. For the first time in her life, she'd chosen herself over duty, over expectation, over the crushing weight of other people's needs. It had cost her everything, but at least she could breathe. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived. It was addressed to her father, but delivered to Evelyn by a tight-lipped servant who clearly knew the household hierarchy had shifted. The seal was unfamiliar, a black wax impression of a stark, angular crest. She broke it open with numb fingers. "Miss Carter, I have a small estate in Derbyshire that requires a tenant. The land is isolated but self-sufficient, a working farm with a modest house. The previous tenant passed recently, and the property has sat empty. I understand you may be seeking alternative arrangements. If you are willing to work the land yourself, it is yours. No rent for the first year. After that, we can negotiate terms based on what you manage to produce. This is not charity. It is an offer of employment. If you accept, you will be expected to maintain the property and operate it responsibly. If you fail, the contract ends. A carriage will be available at the Northern Coaching Inn on the 15th, should you choose to accept. Adrian Blackwood." Evelyn read the letter 3 times, her hand shaking harder with each pass. He was offering her a way out. Not a rescue, an escape route. A chance to survive on her own terms, away from London, away from the scandal, away from everything that had tried to break her. But why? They'd spoken once, barely knew each other. Unless he'd seen something in her that day at the garden party, something worth saving, or at least worth giving a chance. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her pocket. On the morning of the 15th, she left Ashford Manor with a single trunk of belongings and no farewells. Her mother had stopped speaking to her days ago. Her father hadn't looked at her since the wedding. Charlotte had tried, tearfully, to understand, but Evelyn had no words to explain what she'd done, only the bone-deep certainty that staying would have killed something essential inside her. The carriage was waiting, as promised. The driver was an older man with weathered skin and kind eyes, who asked no questions, simply helped her load her trunk and gestured her inside. As the carriage rolled north, London falling away behind her in a haze of smoke and spires, Evelyn pressed her forehead against the window and let herself feel the full weight of what she'd chosen. Freedom. Terrifying, absolute freedom. And whatever came next, whether she succeeded or failed, survived or fell, it would be hers. The estate was called Thornfield, and it was nothing like Ashford Manor. Where Ashford had been grand and imposing, all marble columns and manicured gardens, Thornfield was small and practical, a 2-story stone house with ivy creeping up one side, surrounded by fields that rolled gently toward distant hills. There was a barn, a small stable, a chicken coop, and what looked like a kitchen garden gone wild with weeds. It was rough, worn, isolated. It was perfect. The driver helped her unload her trunk, tipped his hat, and left without ceremony. Evelyn stood in the empty yard, the wind tugging at her travel cloak, and felt the silence settle around her like a blanket. No servants, no mother hovering with criticisms, no father's disappointed glare. Just her, the land, and the future she'd have to build with her own hands. She picked up her skirts and walked toward the house. The interior was sparse but clean. Someone had clearly prepared it for her arrival. A simple parlor, a kitchen with a cast-iron stove, a narrow staircase leading to 2 bedrooms upstairs. The furniture was old but sturdy. The windows needed washing. The floors creaked. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. That first night she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of weak tea and a piece of bread, staring out at the darkening fields, and let herself cry, not from sadness, but from sheer, overwhelming relief. She'd done it. She'd run, and she'd survived. And now, alone in the quiet dark, she whispered the words she'd been too afraid to say out loud for 23 years. I'm free. The work was brutal. Evelyn had grown up with servants to dress her, maids to clean, cooks to prepare every meal. She'd never milked a cow, never mucked out a stable, never planted a seed or harvested a crop. Within a week, her hands were blistered and raw. Her back ached constantly. Her dresses, impractical, delicate things designed for drawing rooms, tore on fences and snagged on brambles until she was forced to cut them shorter, remake them into something functional. She learned by trial and error. The chickens pecked her when she tried to collect eggs. The vegetable garden was a tangle of weeds and dying plants that took days to clear. The roof leaked in 3 places during the first rainstorm, and she spent a miserable night moving buckets around the parlor, listening to the steady plink, plink, plink of water hitting tin. But slowly, painfully slowly, she learned. A neighbor, an older woman named Mrs. Hewitt, who ran the farm a mile down the road, took pity on her and showed her the basics. How to knead bread, how to preserve vegetables, how to tell when the chickens were laying and when they were just being stubborn. You're a strange one, Mrs. Hewitt said one afternoon, watching Evelyn wrestle with a stubborn fence post. City girl playing at farm work. What are you running from? Evelyn paused, wiping sweat from her forehead. Everything. Mrs. Hewitt snorted. Fair enough. Just make sure you're running towards something too, girl. Otherwise you'll end up just as lost. The words stuck with her. What was she running toward? Survival, certainly. Independence. A life that was hers. But beyond that, she didn't know. Not yet. 3 months in, Evelyn had managed to turn Thornfield into something resembling a functioning farm. The chickens were laying regularly. The garden was producing enough vegetables to feed her with some left over to trade. She'd even managed to repair the roof, badly, but well enough to keep the rain out. She was leaner now, harder. Her hands were calloused, her skin tanned from hours in the sun. She barely recognized herself in the small mirror above the wash basin. But she was alive. And she was hers. It was enough. until the day a rider appeared at the edge of her property. She was in the garden, pulling weeds, when she heard the hoofbeats. She looked up, shielding her eyes from the sun, and felt her stomach drop. Adrian Blackwood. He sat astride a dark horse, dressed in riding clothes, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the property. Then his gaze found her, and he dismounted in one smooth motion. "Miss Carter." She stood, acutely aware of how she must look, dirt under her nails, hair escaping its braid, dress patched and faded. Nothing like the girl he'd seen in London. "Mr. Blackwood," her voice came out steady despite her racing heart. "I wasn't expecting you. I was in the area, thought I'd check on the property." He walked closer, his eyes taking in the garden, the repaired fence, the tidy rows of vegetables. "You've done well." It wasn't effusive praise, but something in his tone felt genuine. "I've survived," she corrected. "There's a difference." A slight smile. "Is there?" They stood there for a moment, the silence stretching between them, not uncomfortable but weighted with unspoken questions. "Why did you help me?" Evelyn asked finally, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "You didn't owe me anything. We barely knew each other." Adrian looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "Because I saw someone drowning," he said quietly, "and I've been there myself." She wanted to ask what he meant, what had made him understand so clearly what she'd needed, but before she could find the words, he stepped back toward his horse. "The property is yours as long as you want it," he said. "No conditions, no expectations." "Thank you." The words felt inadequate, too small for what he'd given her. He swung back into the saddle, then paused, looking down at her with those dark, steady eyes. "You're stronger than you think, Miss Carter. Don't forget that." And then he was gone, riding back down the lane toward the main road, leaving Evelyn standing in her garden with dirt on her hands and a strange, fluttering feeling in her chest. She didn't know it then, but that moment, that brief, quiet exchange, would be the last peace she'd have for a very long time. Because 3 miles away, in the study of a grand estate she'd never seen, plans were already being made. Plans that would shatter the fragile sanctuary she'd built. Plans that would force her to choose once again between fear and freedom. And this time, running wouldn't be enough. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning, 6 months after Evelyn had settled into Thornfield. She was in the barn mucking out the stalls, a job she'd grown to find oddly meditative despite the smell, when Mrs. Hewitt appeared in the doorway, her usual cheerful expression replaced by something tight and worried. "You've got visitors coming up the lane," she said without preamble. 3 men, surveyors by the look of their equipment. Evelyn straightened, pitchfork still in hand. "Surveyors? For what?" "Don't know, but they've been working the Mitchells' land since dawn, and the Pratts' place before that." Mrs. Hewitt's mouth pressed into a thin line. "Someone's measuring property lines. Hasn't happened around here in years, not since old Lord Pemberton tried to expand his holdings back in '52. A cold finger of unease traced down Evelyn's spine. She set down the pitchfork and walked out into the yard, wiping her hands on her apron. Sure enough, 3 men in dark coats were making their way across her eastern field, one of them peering through a theodolite while the others drove stakes into the ground at regular intervals. "Can I help you?" she called out, her voice sharper than intended. The nearest man looked up, his expression professionally blank. "Just doing our job, miss. Survey work. Nothing to concern yourself with." "It concerns me when you're on my property without permission." "We have permission." He pulled a folded document from his coat pocket. "Legal authorization to survey all lands within a 3-mile radius of Blackwood Estate. If you have questions, take them up with the landowner." The name hit her like a slap. Blackwood. Adrian Blackwood authorized this? "Not Mr. Adrian Blackwood, miss. Mr. Blackwood Sr. He owns most of the land around here, including the lease on this property." The surveyor's tone remained polite but firm. "We'll be done by nightfall. Good day." They turned back to their work, dismissing her. Evelyn stood there, fury and confusion warring in her chest. Adrian had never mentioned his father, never mentioned that someone else held the actual deed to Thornfield. She'd assumed, foolishly, she now realized, that the property was his to offer. "What does it mean?" she asked Mrs. Hewitt, who'd come to stand beside her. The older woman's face was grim. means someone's planning something, and when wealthy men start measuring land, it's never good news for the people living on it. The surveyors finished their work and left without another word. Evelyn tried to return to her tasks, but her hands shook with barely controlled anger. She felt betrayed, though she couldn't quite articulate why. Adrian had helped her when no one else would, had given her this place, this chance, but now his father, a man she'd never met, was having her land surveyed like she was nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle. That night she lay awake in her narrow bed, listening to the wind rattle the shutters, and tried to quiet the fear rising in her throat. She'd rebuilt her life here, found something resembling peace. The thought of losing it felt like drowning all over again. The next blow came a week later. Evelyn had gone into the village, a small collection of shops and houses about 4 miles from Thornfield, to trade eggs and vegetables for flour and lamp oil. It was a trip she made every 2 weeks, one of her few interactions with the wider community. The village had never been particularly welcoming. The locals knew she was from London, knew about the scandal that had driven her north. They were polite but distant, serving her quickly and without unnecessary conversation. But today was different. She'd barely stepped into the general store when the conversations around her died. The shopkeeper, Mr. Dennison, looked up from his ledger with an expression that was almost pitying. "Miss Carter, wasn't expecting to see you today." "I'm here for my usual order." She set her basket of eggs on the counter. "And I need 2 pounds of flour if you have it." Dennison exchanged a glance with another customer, an older man Evelyn recognized as one of the tenant farmers from the Eastern Holdings. Then he cleared his throat uncomfortably. "I'm afraid I can't help you with that, miss." Evelyn blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "Can't sell to you. Orders from above." He wouldn't meet her eyes. "All merchants in the village have been instructed not to conduct business with Thornfield until further notice." The words took a moment to register. When they did, ice flooded her veins. "On whose orders?" "Blackwood Estate." Dennison's voice dropped. "Look, miss, I'm sorry. I don't know what this is about, but I've got a family to feed. Can't afford to cross the estate." "This is ridiculous." Evelyn's voice came out harder than she intended. "I've done nothing wrong. I pay fairly. I cause no trouble." "It's not about trouble, miss." The older farmer spoke up now, his tone not unkind but firm. "It's about the way things work around here. The Blackwoods own most of the land for 20 miles in any direction. What they say goes. Always has." "So you're just going to refuse me service? Refuse to trade?" Her hands clenched on the counter. "How am I supposed to survive?" No one answered. The silence in the shop was deafening. Evelyn grabbed her basket of eggs, they hadn't even taken them, and walked out, her face burning with humiliation and rage. Behind her, she heard the conversations resume, low and cautious. Outside, the afternoon sun felt mocking. She stood in the dusty street, trying to steady her breathing, trying to think. If the village wouldn't trade with her, she was cut off, isolated. She could grow her own food, yes, but not everything. Not flour, not salt, not oil for her lamps, not the things she needed to make it through winter. She was being starved out, and the only person who could be behind it was Adrian Blackwood's father. But why? What had she done to earn this man's enmity? She'd never even met him. She confronted Adrian 3 days later. He arrived at Thornfield unannounced, riding the same dark horse as before, his expression unreadable. Evelyn was waiting for him in the yard, arms crossed, fury barely contained. "Is this your doing?" she demanded before he'd even dismounted. "The surveyors? The village refusing to trade with me?" Adrian swung down from his horse, his movements controlled. "I heard about the village. I'm sorry. That wasn't my decision." "Then whose was it? Your father's?" She stepped closer, not caring that she probably looked half wild, her hair escaping its braid, her dress stained from working in the garden. "What does he want? Why is he doing this to me?" "It's complicated." "Don't," her voice cracked. "Don't give me evasions. I gave up everything for this place. I've worked myself to exhaustion trying to build something here. And now your family is trying to force me out? Why?" Adrian's jaw tightened. For a moment, he looked like he might deflect again. Then something shifted in his expression, a crack in the careful control. "Because you're in the way," he said quietly. The bluntness of it stole her breath. In the way of what? My father is expanding his holdings. He wants to consolidate the land between here and the river, turn it into a single massive estate. Thornfield sits right in the middle of that plan. Adrian's voice was flat, carefully emotionless. He's been buying up properties for the last year. Yours is one of the last pieces he doesn't control. But you gave this place to me. You said it was mine as long as I wanted it. I meant it. His eyes met hers and she saw frustration there, and something darker. But I don't own Thornfield. My father does. I manage some of his holdings, but the deeds, the real power, that's all his. Evelyn felt the ground shift beneath her. So when you offered me this place, I was giving you something that wasn't fully mine to give. He said it like a confession. I thought I had time, thought I could convince him to let you stay. But he's more determined than I anticipated. Why didn't you tell me? The betrayal was sharp, cutting. Why let me think I was safe here? Because you needed somewhere to go, and I... He stopped, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration she'd never seen from him before. I didn't think he'd move this fast. I thought I could handle it. Handle it? A bitter laugh escaped her. I'm not a problem to be handled, Mr. Blackwood. I'm a person trying to survive. I know that. His voice dropped. You think I don't know that? They stood there in the yard, the tension crackling between them like a live wire. Evelyn wanted to scream at him, wanted to rage at the unfairness of it all. But under the anger was something worse, fear. Because if Adrian couldn't protect her, if his father was determined to drive her out, then she had nowhere left to run. What happens now? She asked, hating how small her voice sounded. My father is offering to buy you out. He'll pay you for the improvements you've made, give you enough to start over somewhere else. I don't want to start over somewhere else. I want to stay here. Then you're going to have to fight him. Adrian's gaze was steady, unflinching. And I need you to understand, my father doesn't lose. He has money, power, connections. He'll make your life a misery until you give in. He's already started, Evelyn shot back. Or hadn't you noticed? Adrian flinched, the first real crack in his composure. I'm trying to help you. Are you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've helped me into a trap. The words hung in the air between them, sharp and accusing. Adrian took a step back, his expression shuddering. I'll speak to my father again. Try to make him see reason. Don't bother. Evelyn's voice was cold now, protective anger wrapping around her fear like armor. I'll handle this myself. Evelyn? Miss Carter, she corrected. I think we should keep things formal from now on, don't you? She turned and walked back toward the house, not waiting for his response. Behind her, she heard the creak of leather as he mounted his horse, the sound of hoofbeats fading down the lane. Only when she was inside, the door closed firmly behind her, did she let herself shake. The isolation intensified over the following weeks. Mrs. Hewitt stopped visiting. When Evelyn walked to her neighbor's farm to ask why, she found the older woman in her yard, hanging laundry with jerky, angry movements. I can't be seen helping you, Mrs. Hewitt said before Evelyn could even speak. Blackwood's man came by, said if I keep associating with you, they'll raise my lease payment. I can't afford that girl. I'm sorry, but I can't. I understand, Evelyn said, even though she didn't, even though it felt like the walls were closing in. The other tenant farmers avoided her too. When she passed them on the road, they looked away, guilt written across their faces, but not enough to overcome their fear. She was alone. Completely, utterly alone. And still the pressure mounted. One morning she woke to find her irrigation ditch had been dammed upstream, cutting off water to her fields. She spent 2 days digging a new channel, her hands raw and bleeding by the time she finished. A week later, someone cut her fence lines during the night. Her chickens scattered, and it took her 3 days to round them all up. 2 were lost to foxes. The message was clear: leave or be destroyed piece by piece. But Evelyn had already been destroyed once. She'd walked away from everything she'd known, survived the scandal, rebuilt herself from nothing. She'd be damned if she'd let some rich man she'd never met take that away. The idea came to her late one night, born from desperation and the memory of something Mrs. Hewitt had said months ago. Make sure you're running towards something, not just away from it. Evelyn had been surviving, yes, but surviving wasn't enough anymore. If she wanted to stay, she needed to become indispensable, needed to make herself valuable in a way that even Blackwood Sr. couldn't ignore. The land around Thornfield was good, rich soil, plenty of water from the stream that ran along the northern boundary. But most of the tenant farmers grew the same crops: wheat, barley, basic vegetables. There was no diversity, no innovation. What if she changed that? She'd read once, years ago in her father's library, about new agricultural techniques being developed in the southern counties. Crop rotation, companion planting, methods that increased yields without depleting the soil. What if she could prove those methods worked? What if she could turn Thornfield into a model farm, something that demonstrated value beyond just occupying space? It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was the only card she had left to play. She threw herself into the work with renewed intensity. She read every book on farming she could get her hands on, borrowed from a sympathetic vicar 2 villages over who didn't know about the Blackwood boycott. She experimented with different planting patterns, different combinations of crops. She failed. A lot. An entire row of beans died because she'd planted them in soil that was too acidic. Her first attempt at companion planting resulted in the tomatoes choking out the herbs. She lost a week's work to a late frost she hadn't anticipated. But slowly, painfully, she learned. And some things started to work. The section of field where she'd rotated legumes with grain showed noticeably healthier growth. The area where she'd intercropped marigolds with vegetables had fewer pests. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. She was in the field one afternoon documenting her results in a battered notebook when a carriage appeared on the lane. Not Adrian this time. The carriage was grander, pulled by matched bays, with a crest on the door that made her stomach drop. The Blackwood crest. The carriage stopped, and a man stepped out, tall, silver-haired, dressed in expensive dark clothing that screamed wealth and power. His face was harder than Adrian's, more angular, with the same dark eyes but none of the warmth. Blackwood Sr. Evelyn stood her ground as he approached, though her heart was hammering. She'd faced down London society. She could face down one wealthy landowner. Miss Carter. His voice was clipped, aristocratic. I'm Marcus Blackwood. I believe we have matters to discuss. Do we? She kept her tone level. I was under the impression your position was quite clear. His mouth twitched. Amusement or irritation, she couldn't tell. You're more stubborn than I anticipated. Most tenants would have accepted my offer by now. I'm not most tenants. No. He looked around the farm, his gaze taking in the neat fields, the repaired buildings, the obvious signs of hard work. You're the scandal from London, the runaway bride who destroyed her family's prospects and fled north like a criminal. The words were designed to wound. They did. I made a choice, Evelyn said, refusing to look away. Perhaps you're unfamiliar with the concept. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. Careful, girl. You're in no position to be insolent. And you're on my property without invitation. Shall we trade warnings, or would you like to state your business and leave? For a moment, she thought she'd pushed too far. Blackwood's expression turned glacial, but then, surprisingly, he laughed, a short, sharp bark of sound. I can see why Adrian was intrigued by you. You've got spine, I'll give you that. He pulled a document from his coat. Here's my final offer. £500 for the improvements you've made, plus enough to establish yourself in another county. Take it, and this ends cleanly. And if I refuse? Then I make things significantly worse. I can do more than cut off the village, Miss Carter. I can have the roads around your property declared unsafe, cutting you off entirely. I can contest your lease in court, a process that will drain whatever savings you have. I can make it so no one in 3 counties will hire you or help you. His smile was cold. I've done it before. I'll do it again. Evelyn's hands clenched at her sides. Why do you even want this land? You have thousands of acres. What's one small farm to you? Principle. The word came out hard. I don't tolerate obstacles. When I set a plan in motion, I see it through. Your presence here disrupts that plan. Therefore, you must go. No. Blackwood blinked. I beg your pardon? No. I won't leave. I won't accept your money. And I won't be bullied off land I've earned the right to occupy. Her voice shook slightly, but she forced the words out anyway. Do your worst, Mr. Blackwood. I've survived worse than you. His expression darkened. You're making a grave mistake. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. For a long moment, they stared at each other, an impasse carved from stubborn wills. Then Blackwood turned on his heel and stalked back to his carriage. Before climbing in, he paused and looked back at her. You have 1 month, he said. After that, I stop being polite. The carriage rolled away, leaving Evelyn standing alone in her field, trembling with adrenaline and terror, and something that felt dangerously close to pride. She'd faced down Marcus Blackwood and lived, but the real battle was only beginning. The next 3 weeks were a study in escalating warfare. Blackwood made good on his threats. The road leading to Thornfield developed mysterious ruts and washouts that made it nearly impassable. The stream that fed her irrigation ditch was partially diverted, legally, according to old property rights Blackwood had dug up. Her crops began to suffer. Without adequate water, the experimental plants she'd been nursing started to wilt. She hauled water by hand, bucket after bucket, until her shoulders screamed and her hands bled. The local constable appeared one morning with questions about property boundaries and accusations that her chickens had been ranging onto Blackwood land. It was absurd. Her chickens never went near the property line, but she had to spend an entire day producing documentation to prove her case. Someone started a rumor in the village that she was mad, that isolation had broken her mind, that she talked to herself in the fields and practiced witchcraft under the full moon. The last one might have been funny if it hadn't been working. The few people who'd still been cautiously polite now crossed the street when they saw her coming, but Evelyn refused to break. She documented everything, every act of sabotage, every legal harassment, every rumor. She kept meticulous records of her crop experiments, noting which methods worked and which failed. And she wrote letters. Letters to agricultural societies in London, letters to universities where she'd heard progressive farming was being studied, letters outlining her methods and results, asking for guidance, for validation, for anything that might give her work legitimacy. Most went unanswered. But one letter to a Professor Whitmore at Cambridge who was researching sustainable agriculture came back with a response that made her hands shake as she read it. Miss Carter, your observations are quite interesting. The intercropping methods you describe align with theories we've been developing here. I would very much like to visit your farm and see these results firsthand. Would the 3rd week of October be convenient? Hope surged through her like a wildfire. If a Cambridge professor validated her work, if she could prove that her methods had real value, then maybe, just maybe, Blackwood would have to see her as more than an obstacle. Maybe she could turn this farm into something too valuable to destroy. Adrian appeared the night before Professor Whitmore was scheduled to arrive. Evelyn was in the barn, checking on the last of her experimental crops by lantern light, when she heard footsteps. She turned to find him standing in the doorway, looking haggard in a way she'd never seen before. You need to leave, he said without preamble. Tonight. She straightened, anger flaring. I'm not having this conversation again. My father is planning something. Adrian stepped into the barn, his face tight with worry. I don't know what, but he's been meeting with lawyers, with magistrates. He's building a case to have you forcibly removed. Let him try. I have a Cambridge professor coming tomorrow, someone who actually cares about what I'm doing here. He knows. Adrian's voice was sharp. He knows about the professor. He's known about your letters for weeks. The words hit her like ice water. How? He has connections everywhere, including the postal service. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. Evelyn, please, you've made your point. You've proven you're not a coward, but this has gone too far. If you stay, he'll destroy you. He's been trying to destroy me for months. I'm still here. Because you're stubborn and brave and too damn proud to know when to quit. The sudden heat in his voice startled her. But pride won't save you when he brings the magistrate with a writ of eviction. Pride won't keep you warm when he has you arrested for trespassing on land he claims you're occupying illegally. This is my home, her voice cracked. The only one I have. Where am I supposed to go? Anywhere. I'll help you. I have properties in Scotland, in Wales, places he can't touch. I'll set you up somewhere safe, somewhere you can actually build a life without constantly fighting for survival. So I should just run again? The bitterness in her laugh was sharp. That's your solution? Every time things get hard, just run? It's not running if I'm offering you a better option. It's running if I didn't choose it. She stepped closer, anger and hurt and exhaustion all boiling over. You want to save me, Adrian? Then help me fight. Help me win. Stop trying to make me leave the only place where I've ever felt like I could breathe. His expression cracked, showing the conflict beneath. I can't fight my own father. You don't understand what you're asking. Then you're a coward. The word hung between them like a blade. Adrian's face went white. You think I'm a coward? You think I want any of this? I'm trying to protect you. I don't need protection. I need someone to stand with me. There's a difference. And if I can't? His voice dropped. If I can't betray my own family for someone I barely know, does that make me a coward? Or does that make me human? The question landed like a punch, because he was right, wasn't he? She was asking him to choose between his father and a woman he'd met a handful of times. It was unreasonable, unfair. But life had been unreasonable and unfair to her too, and she was still here, still fighting. Leave, she said quietly. If you can't help me, then leave. I have work to do. Adrian stared at her for a long moment, something raw and painful in his eyes. Then he turned and walked out into the night without another word. Evelyn stood alone in the barn, surrounded by her dying crops and desperate dreams, and wondered if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life, or if the mistake had been trusting anyone in the first place. Professor Whitmore never arrived. Evelyn waited all the next day, pacing the yard, checking the lane every few minutes. By evening, she knew something was wrong. She walked to the village, 4 miles on foot now that the road was impassable to her small cart, and went straight to the postal office. The clerk looked uncomfortable when he saw her. Miss Carter, there's a letter for you. He handed it over like it might burn him. The letter was from Professor Whitmore's assistant, brief and apologetic. Professor Whitmore has been advised that the agricultural work at Thornfield is not being conducted in good faith, and that visiting would be a waste of university resources. He regrets any inconvenience and wishes you well in your future endeavors. Evelyn read it twice, her hands shaking. Blackwood had gotten to him, had poisoned the well before the professor could even arrive. Her last hope. Gone. She walked back to Thornfield in the dark. The letter crumpled in her fist and felt the fight drain out of her like water from a broken cistern. What was the point? She could work herself to death, could innovate and experiment and prove her worth 100 times over, and it wouldn't matter, because men like Marcus Blackwood didn't care about worth. They cared about power. And she had none. The house was dark when she arrived. She lit a single lamp and sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. In the distance, she heard the first rumble of thunder. A storm was coming, and this time she didn't know if she had the strength left to weather it. The storm hit just after midnight. Evelyn was still sitting at the kitchen table, the lamp burning low, when the first gust of wind slammed into the house hard enough to rattle every window in its frame. She jerked upright, the crumpled letter falling from her lap to the floor. Another gust followed, then another, building into a sustained roar that made the old stone walls groan. Rain began to fall. Not gradually, but all at once, like someone had overturned an ocean onto the roof. She stood and moved to the window, peering out into darkness broken only by occasional flashes of lightning. In those brief illuminations, she could see her fields bending under the assault, the experimental crops she'd spent months nurturing getting beaten into the mud. A crack of thunder shook the house. Then she heard it, a different sound beneath the storm's fury. Splintering wood, the sharp report of something breaking. The barn. Evelyn grabbed her cloak and ran out into the deluge without thinking, without planning. The wind hit her like a physical blow, driving rain so hard it felt like needles against her skin. She couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, could barely keep her footing on the muddy ground. Lightning flashed, and she saw it. The barn door hanging askew, one of the roof beams sagging at a dangerous angle. Inside, she could hear the terrified sounds of her chickens, the crash of falling equipment. She fought her way to the barn entrance, grabbed the broken door, and hauled it open far enough to slip through. Inside was chaos. The roof leak she'd patched badly months ago had given way entirely, water pouring through in a steady stream. Tools and equipment had been knocked over by the wind coming through gaps in the walls. Her chickens were in a panic, feathers flying as they scrambled away from the flooding corner. Evelyn waded into the mess, trying to herd the chickens toward the drier side, trying to salvage what she could. Her hands were numb, her clothes soaked through. She managed to secure the feed bins, move her precious seed stores to higher ground. Then she heard the groan of stressed wood above her. She looked up just as the damaged roof beam gave way with a sound like a cannon shot. Time seemed to slow. She saw the beam falling, saw the section of roof it was supporting start to collapse, knew with horrible clarity that she couldn't get out of the way in time. Something slammed into her from the side, driving her out of the path of falling debris. She hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of her, a heavy weight pinning her down as wood and thatch crashed down exactly where she'd been standing. For a moment she couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Then the weight shifted and she realized it wasn't debris holding her down. It was a person. Adrian. He rolled off her, coughing, and grabbed her arm. "Move! The whole structure's coming down!" He hauled her to her feet and half-dragged, half-carried her out of the barn. They made it maybe 10 yards before the rest of the roof gave way with a sound like the world ending, the entire structure collapsing in on itself in a shower of broken wood and stone. They stood in the rain, both breathing hard, staring at the destruction. "What?" Evelyn's voice came out as a gasp. "What are you doing here?" "Saving your stubborn life, apparently," Adrian had to shout over the storm. "Come on, we need to get inside before—" A massive crack of lightning struck somewhere close, too close, followed immediately by thunder that felt like it was trying to split the earth open. The ground shook. They ran for the house. Inside, with the door slammed shut against the wind, they stood dripping on the floor, both shaking from cold and adrenaline. Evelyn's teeth were chattering so hard she could barely speak. Adrian grabbed a blanket from the chair and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Sit down before you fall down." "The barn," she managed, "is gone. There's nothing you can do about it tonight." He was soaking wet too, his dark hair plastered to his head, his shirt torn where debris had caught him. "You're lucky you weren't killed." "Lucky?" A slightly hysterical laugh bubbled up. "That barn was half my livelihood. The tools, the feed stores, can be replaced." His hands gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You can't. Do you understand that? You can't be replaced." The intensity in his voice cut through her shock. She stared at him, really seeing him for the first time since he'd appeared like some kind of ghost in her collapsing barn. "Why did you come back?" she whispered. "Because I'm a coward." The admission came out rough. "Because I told myself I couldn't help you, that it was impossible to stand against my father. And then I went home and sat in my study drinking whiskey and hating myself for it." He let go of her shoulders and stepped back, running a hand through his wet hair. "I came back to tell you that you were right. That I was choosing the easy path because it was safe. Because going against him would cost me everything I've built." His jaw tightened. "And then I got here and saw you about to get yourself killed over a barn and I—" He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Another crash of thunder shook the house. The lamp flickered. "Your father will destroy you if you help me," Evelyn said. "You know that." "Probably." "You'll lose your position, your inheritance, everything." "I know." "Then why?" "Because some things are worth more than safety." The words exploded out of him. "Because I've spent my whole life doing what was expected, what was strategic, what would keep me in my father's good graces. And it's made me into someone I don't even recognize anymore. Someone who watches injustice happen and does nothing because it's not his problem." He moved to the window, staring out at the storm. "You ran from your wedding, destroyed your reputation, gave up everything for the chance to be free. And I called you brave, but I didn't really understand it until now. Until I had to make the same choice." Evelyn stood on shaking legs, the blanket still wrapped around her. "What choice?" Adrian turned to face her. "To stand with you, to fight him, even if it means losing everything." "That's insane." So is staying on a farm that's actively trying to kill you. A ghost of a smile. We can be insane together. Lightning flashed again, illuminating his face, bruised from the falling debris, exhausted, but more alive than she'd ever seen him. And Evelyn realized something that should have terrified her, but somehow didn't. She trusted him. Despite everything, despite the lies and the half-measures and the months of pressure, she trusted that he meant what he was saying right now. "What do we do?" she asked. "We survive the night. Then we figure out how to win." They spent the rest of the storm trying to save what they could. Adrian had a tarp in his saddlebag. He'd brought supplies, expecting to find her in trouble, and they managed to rig it over the worst of the leaks in the main house. The roof held, barely, groaning and creaking, but not giving way. By the time dawn broke, pale and watery, they were both exhausted. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape of devastation. The barn was a total loss, reduced to a pile of shattered timber and broken stone. Half her fields were flooded. The experimental crops she'd been nursing were destroyed, beaten into the mud or uprooted entirely by the wind. Evelyn stood in the doorway, surveying the damage, and felt the last of her hope drain away. "It's over," she said quietly. "Even if your father does nothing more, this finishes it. I can't recover from this." Adrian was beside her, looking just as grim. "The barn can be rebuilt." "With what money? What materials?" She turned to face him. "I'm broke, Adrian. I've spent everything I had just surviving the last 6 months. I can't rebuild. I can't even replant before winter comes." She expected him to argue, to offer empty reassurances. Instead, he was quiet for a long moment, his expression calculating. "What if you weren't alone?" he said finally. "What? What if this wasn't just your farm? What if it was ours?" Evelyn blinked. "I don't understand." Adrian's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "My father wants to consolidate land. He wants this property because it fits into his grand design. But there's one thing he can't touch, one type of property claim that supersedes even his deeds and legal maneuvers." "What are you talking about?" "Marriage." The word hung in the air between them. "If you were my wife, this land would become part of my holdings. Protected, untouchable. He couldn't evict you without effectively evicting his own son." For a moment, Evelyn couldn't breathe. "You're not serious." "I am." Adrian's voice was steady. "It's the only move he won't see coming. The only way to protect this place and you at the same time. That's..." She didn't even know what to call it. Absurd? Desperate? "You want me to marry you so your father can't steal my farm? I want you to have a fighting chance. This gives you one. But you don't. We barely know each other. We're not..." She struggled to find words that made sense. "This isn't what marriage is supposed to be." "No," Adrian agreed. "It's supposed to be a business arrangement between families, made for political and financial gain. That's what I was always taught anyway." His dark eyes met hers. "This would be different. This would be a choice we both make for our own reasons. Honest, at least. Your father will never accept it. He won't have a choice. Once the vows are said, it's done. Legal and binding." Adrian stepped closer. "I'm not asking you to love me, Evelyn. I'm not even asking you to like me. I'm asking you to let me help in the only way I actually can." She wanted to say no. Wanted to tell him it was ridiculous, that she'd rather lose everything than enter another arranged marriage, even one built on strategy rather than obligation. But as she looked out at her destroyed barn, her ruined fields, the wreckage of months of work, she felt the cold weight of reality settle in her chest. She'd tried fighting alone. She'd tried pride and determination and sheer stubborn will. And she was losing. Maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to do this alone anymore. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "we need rules, agreements. Name them. This farm stays mine to run. You don't interfere with how I manage it." "Agreed. And this is temporary, a strategy, not a real marriage. When the threat from your father passes, we can quietly dissolve it." Something flickered across Adrian's face, too quick to read. "If that's what you want, it is." She needed to be clear about this, needed to protect what was left of her battered heart. I won't be owned, Adrian. Not by your father, not by society, and not by you. I know. His voice softened. I've never wanted to own you, Evelyn. I just want to help you stay free. She studied his face, looking for deception, for hidden motives, found only exhaustion and something that looked almost like hope. Then yes, she said, I'll marry you. They rode to the village that afternoon, both still looking like they'd survived a war, which, in a sense, they had. The vicar was a nervous little man named Pemberton, who nearly dropped his prayer book when Adrian walked into the church with a mud-stained woman at his side and announced they needed to be married immediately. Mr. Blackwood, this is highly irregular. I have the license. Adrian produced a document from his coat. Everything's in order. Pemberton scanned it with trembling hands. This was issued 3 days ago. I'm a man who plans ahead. Evelyn shot him a look. You've had a marriage license for 3 days? I had it drawn up after our last conversation. Thought it might be useful. He said it so matter-of-factly that she didn't know whether to laugh or hit him. You arrogant... Practical, he corrected. There's a difference. Pemberton cleared his throat nervously. The banns haven't been read. Special license. Also in order. Adrian's tone brooked no argument. Just perform the ceremony, Vicar. But, Mr. Blackwood, your father, surely he should be informed. We'll find out soon enough. Adrian's voice went cold. Are you going to marry us, or do I need to find someone who will? Pemberton flinched. Of course. Let me fetch my wife as a witness. He scurried off, leaving Evelyn and Adrian standing in the small church that smelled of damp stone and old incense. This is insane, Evelyn said quietly. Yes. We're going to regret this. Probably. Your father is going to make our lives a nightmare. Almost certainly. Adrian looked down at her, and despite everything, the exhaustion, the fear, the sheer absurdity of what they were about to do, his expression was calm. Still want to go through with it? Evelyn thought about running. It would be so easy to walk out of this church, to disappear into the countryside, to try again somewhere else with a new name and a fresh start. But she was so tired of running. Yes, she said, let's do this. The ceremony was brief and awkward, conducted by a sweating vicar while his wife looked on with poorly concealed shock. Evelyn wore the same muddy dress she'd fought the storm in. Adrian's coat was torn, and his hands were bandaged from the barn collapse. They were the least romantic couple imaginable. But when the vicar asked if she took this man as her husband, Evelyn looked into Adrian's dark eyes and said, I do, with a steadiness that surprised her. And when Adrian repeated the vows, his voice was firm, certain, like this was real, like it mattered. The vicar pronounced them married, and Adrian leaned down to kiss her. A brief, formal press of lips that was over almost before it began. But Evelyn felt it like an electric shock anyway, a jolt of awareness that this was real now. She'd married Adrian Blackwood, the stranger who'd saved her life, who'd given her a farm and then almost destroyed her trying to protect his father's plans, who now stood beside her as her husband. What had she done? They signed the register in silence. The vicar's wife was already rushing off to spread the news, her face flushed with the thrill of scandal. By nightfall, everyone in the county would know, including Marcus Blackwood. They rode back to Thornfield as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and deep red. Neither spoke much. Evelyn's mind was spinning, trying to process what had just happened, what it would mean. She was married, again. Except this time, she'd chosen it, on her own terms, for her own reasons. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like stepping off a cliff and hoping someone had built a bridge halfway down. He'll know by now, Adrian said as they approached the farm. Someone will have sent word. What will he do? Come here. Probably tonight. Adrian helped her down from his horse, his hand steady on her waist. We should prepare for that. Prepare how? What can we possibly say that will make this better? We tell him the truth. Adrian's jaw set in a hard line. That we're married, that this property is now under my protection, and that if he wants to continue his plans, he'll have to find a way that doesn't involve destroying what's mine. The possessiveness in his tone should have bothered her. Instead, it sent a strange thrill through her chest, the feeling of finally having someone on her side, someone willing to fight. They went inside and Adrian started a fire while Evelyn made tea with shaking hands. The domesticity of it was surreal. A day ago, she'd been alone, facing ruin. Now she was married to a man she barely knew, preparing to face down one of the wealthiest landowners in the north of England. "Are you afraid?" she asked as she handed him a cup. Adrian considered the question. "Terrified." "Good." She sat down across from him. "I'd worry if you weren't." A slight smile. "You're handling this remarkably well." "I'm very good at pretending I'm fine when I'm actually falling apart inside. Years of practice." She took a sip of tea, the warmth steadying her. "What happens if he disowns you?" "Then I'll be a farmer. Learn to fix barns and plant crops." He said it lightly, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. Could be worse. "You've never worked a day of manual labor in your life." "I saved you from a collapsing barn. That counts." "You pushed me out of the way and nearly got killed yourself. That's not labor, that's stupidity." "Brave stupidity, though." Despite everything, Evelyn felt a laugh bubble up. It came out slightly hysterical, but it was real. "This is insane. We're insane." "I believe we established that earlier." The moment hung between them, fragile as spun glass. Then they heard it, the sound of horses approaching. Multiple horses, moving fast. Adrian stood, his expression hardening. "He's here." Marcus Blackwood arrived with an entourage, 2 lawyers, the local magistrate, and half a dozen armed men who looked like they'd been pulled from the estate's security force. He dismounted in the yard like a conquering general, his silver hair gleaming in the last light of day, his face carved from granite. Adrian stepped out to meet him, with Evelyn at his side. "Father, what have you done?" Marcus's voice was deadly quiet. "Tell me the rumors are wrong. Tell me you haven't been fool enough to marry this woman." "Her name is Evelyn Carter Blackwood now." Adrian's voice matched his father's in coldness. "My wife. And this property is under my protection." For a moment, Marcus just stared at him. Then he laughed, a sound like breaking ice. "Your protection? You think a hastily arranged marriage changes anything? You think I can't contest this? Have it annulled within a week?" "Try." Adrian stepped forward. "But you'll find the license is legal, the ceremony performed by a licensed vicar, and the marriage consummated." The lie came out smooth as silk. "Challenge it in court if you want. But it will take months, and by then the property will be legally entangled with mine. Your consolidation plan falls apart." Marcus's face went white with rage. "You ungrateful—" "Careful, father. You're on my property now." "Your property?" Marcus's voice rose. "Everything you have I gave you. The land, the money, the position, all of it mine. And you throw it away for some ruined London girl who ran from her own wedding like a coward?" "She ran from a man who would have broken her." Adrian's voice went hard. "Just like you're trying to break her now. Just like you break everyone who gets in your way. I build empires. I create wealth and opportunity. You destroy anything that doesn't serve your plans." For the first time, real emotion cracked through Adrian's control. "You've spent my whole life telling me that power is the only thing that matters. That everything else, kindness, compassion, basic human decency, is weakness. And I believed you. I became exactly what you wanted. Cold, calculating, empty." He gestured toward Evelyn. "But she showed me something different. She lost everything and rebuilt herself. She faced you, the most powerful man in the county, and refused to back down. That's not weakness, father. That's strength you don't understand because you've never had to fight for anything real." Marcus's hands clenched into fists. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life." "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." The tension in the yard was suffocating. The armed men shifted nervously. The lawyers whispered to each other. The magistrate looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Then Marcus's expression changed. The rage smoothed away, replaced by something colder, more dangerous. "Very well," he said quietly. "You want to stand against me? Let's see how long you last." He turned to one of the lawyers. "Draw up papers to revoke his access to all family accounts. Cancel his letters of credit. Inform our business partners that Adrian Blackwood no longer speaks for this family. Father, Adrian's voice held a note of warning. You made your choice. Marcus's smile was razor sharp. Now live with it. See how long your marriage lasts when you can't afford to feed your wife. When the repairs to this pathetic farm cost more than you can earn. When winter comes and you're burning furniture to stay warm. He mounted his horse, looking down at them with contempt. I give you 3 months before you come crawling back, begging for forgiveness. And when you do, the price will be much higher than it is now. I won't come back, Adrian said. We'll see. Marcus wheeled his horse around and rode off, his entourage following. The armed men cast nervous glances back as they left, as if expecting something to explode. When the sound of hoofbeats finally faded, Evelyn let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Well, she said shakily, that went better than expected. Adrian looked at her incredulously. Better? He didn't have us arrested, didn't burn the house down. I'm counting it as a win. A strangled laugh escaped him. Then he sat down right there in the muddy yard, head in his hands. What have I done? Evelyn sat beside him, her practical dress pooling in the dirt. You told your father to go to hell, in front of witnesses. It was actually quite impressive. I just lost everything. My inheritance, my income, my entire future. You still have the farm. I don't know the first thing about farming. Neither did I 6 months ago. She bumped her shoulder against his. You'll learn. We both will. He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, Adrian Blackwood looked completely lost, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. Why aren't you angry? He asked. You married me to save this place, and now I've made things worse. My father will come after us harder than before. We have no money, no resources. We have each other. The words came out before she could think about them. That's more than I had yesterday. Something shifted in his expression. You really believe that? I have to. She looked out at the ruined farm, the collapsed barn, the fields that would need months of work to recover. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this? They sat there in the fading light, two people who'd just burned their lives down and built something new from the ashes. It wasn't a marriage of love. It wasn't even a marriage of convenience, really. It was a marriage of survival. And sometimes, that was enough. That night they slept in separate rooms, Evelyn in her small bedroom upstairs, Adrian on the settee in the parlor. It was awkward and formal and nothing like a wedding night should be. But Evelyn found she didn't mind. She lay in her narrow bed listening to the house settle around her and tried to process everything that had happened. Married. She was married again. To a man who'd just sacrificed everything to protect her. It should have felt like a debt, an obligation. Instead, it felt like possibility. She must have finally fallen asleep, because the next thing she knew, she was being shaken awake by rough hands. She jerked upright, disoriented, to find Adrian standing over her in the darkness. Get up, he said urgently. Something's wrong. What? Then she smelled it. Smoke. She scrambled out of bed, heart pounding, and followed Adrian to the window. Outside, orange light flickered against the darkness. Fire. The field. The eastern field where most of her remaining crops still stood. It was burning. No. The word came out as a whisper of horror. No, no, no! She ran for the stairs, Adrian close behind her. They burst out into the yard to find the fire spreading fast, driven by wind, consuming everything in its path. And standing at the edge of the firelight, barely visible in the shadows, was a figure on horseback. Watching. Even at a distance, even in the dark, Evelyn knew who it was. Marcus Blackwood. The message was clear. This is just the beginning. Adrian saw him too. His whole body went rigid with rage. You bastard! But Marcus was already turning his horse, disappearing into the night, leaving them with nothing but flames and ruin. They fought the fire until dawn, hauling water from the stream, beating at the flames with wet blankets. By the time they got it under control, half the field was destroyed. The rest was scorched beyond saving. Evelyn stood at the edge of the devastation, covered in soot and ash, and felt something inside her finally break. She'd lost. Despite everything, the marriage, the defiance, the desperate gamble, she'd lost. There was nothing left to save. Adrian came to stand beside her, equally filthy and exhausted. "We'll rebuild," he said, but even he didn't sound convinced. "With what?" Her voice was hollow. "We have no money, no crops, no way to make it through winter. We'll find a way." There is no way! The words exploded out of her. "Don't you see? Your father will keep destroying everything we build until there's nothing left. We can't win this. We can't." She couldn't finish, couldn't breathe past the crushing weight of defeat. Adrian grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. His face was streaked with ash, his eyes red from smoke, but blazing with something fierce. "Listen to me," he said. "My father thinks he's won. He thinks he's broken us, but he's wrong. He's—" "How can you say that? Look around." "Because I know something he doesn't." Adrian's grip tightened. "I know where he's vulnerable." Evelyn stared at him. "What are you talking about?" "My father's consolidation plan. It's not just about land. It's about a deal he's making with investors from London. A massive development project that requires every piece of property in this area to be under his control." Adrian's expression turned calculating. "If even one property won't sell, the whole deal falls apart. He loses millions. But he already owns everything except—" Understanding dawned. "Except Thornfield, which is now legally mine, protected by our marriage." A grim smile. "He can burn our crops. He can cut off our income, but he can't take the land itself without my agreement. So we have leverage. We have the only thing he actually needs." Adrian let go of her shoulders. "And I know exactly how to use it." Evelyn's mind raced, exhaustion falling away as hope, dangerous, fragile hope, flickered to life in her chest. "What do you need me to do?" "Trust me, and be ready to fight dirty." She looked at the burned field, the ruined crops, the farm that had almost killed her to maintain. Then she looked at Adrian, her husband, her unlikely ally, the man who'd just lost everything to stand beside her. "I've been fighting dirty since I ran from that altar," she said. "Let's finish this." Adrian's smile turned sharp, predatory. "Then let's give my father a war he won't forget." Adrian disappeared for 3 days. He left before dawn the morning after the fire, taking his horse and a satchel of documents he'd kept hidden in his saddlebag. His only instruction to Evelyn was terse and cryptic. "Don't give up the land. No matter what he offers, no matter what he threatens, hold the line." Then he was gone, riding south toward London, leaving her alone with the burned fields and a pile of questions she couldn't answer. Mrs. Hewitt appeared on the second day, looking guilty and nervous. She found Evelyn in what remained of the garden, salvaging what vegetables hadn't been trampled or scorched. "Heard you got married," the older woman said without preamble. Evelyn straightened, wiping dirt from her hands. "News travels fast. In a village this size? Might as well have announced it from the church tower." Mrs. Hewitt stepped closer, studying her with sharp eyes. "Adrian Blackwood, that's a bold move, girl. Stupid, maybe, but bold." "Stupid seems to be my specialty lately. His father came by my place yesterday. Offered me twice what my land's worth if I'd testify you've been operating Thornfield illegally. Said you've been trespassing, damaging property, stealing water." Evelyn's stomach dropped. And I told him to go to hell." Mrs. Hewitt's mouth curved into a grim smile. "I may be scared of Marcus Blackwood, but I'm not a liar. You've done nothing but work yourself half to death on that farm. If that's a crime, then half the county should be in prison." Relief flooded through Evelyn so powerfully her knees went weak. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. He'll find others who will talk. There's always someone desperate enough to lie for money." The older woman pulled a wrapped bundle from her basket. "Brought you bread and some preserves. Figure you could use it." "I can't pay you. Didn't ask you to. Consider it a wedding present." Mrs. Hewitt pressed the bundle into her hands. "That husband of yours, is he really standing against his father, or is this some kind of scheme?" Evelyn thought about Adrian pushing her out of the path of falling debris, about him facing down Marcus in the yard with nothing but conviction, about the look in his eyes when he'd said, "We have each other." "He's standing," she said quietly. "I think it might cost him everything, but he's standing." Mrs. Hewitt nodded slowly. "Then so will I. Someone's got to show these rich bastards they can't just steamroll over everyone." After the older woman left, Evelyn sat on the front step with the bread and preserves and let herself cry. Not from despair this time, but from the overwhelming realization that she wasn't completely alone anymore. The war wasn't over, but she'd found an ally where she least expected one. Whoa. Adrian returned on the fourth day looking like he'd aged a decade. Evelyn was repairing fence posts when she heard the horse approaching. She looked up to see him riding slowly up the lane, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion, dark circles under his eyes. She dropped the hammer and ran to meet him. "What happened?" she demanded as he dismounted. "Where have you been?" "London. Making deals with people I swore I'd never deal with again." He pulled a leather portfolio from his saddlebag, his movements stiff. "But I got what we needed." "Which is?" "Proof." He met her eyes, and despite the exhaustion, there was something fierce in his expression. "Proof that my father's development deal is built on fraud." Evelyn's breath caught. "What kind of fraud?" "The investors he's courting? He told them he already owns all the land in this area. Showed them forged deeds, falsified surveys. He's been taking their money, hundreds of thousands of pounds, on the promise of a consolidated estate that doesn't actually exist." Adrian's mouth twisted. "Because he doesn't own Thornfield, and now he never will." "Can you prove it?" "I have copies of the documents he submitted to the investors, and I have testimony from a surveyor he fired last year who's willing to swear the surveys were fabricated." Adrian's hand tightened on the portfolio. "It's enough to destroy him, enough to bring criminal charges." Evelyn stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "You're going to turn your own father over to the authorities." "I'm going to give him a choice." Adrian's voice was cold. "Stop harassing us, withdraw all claims to this property, and leave us in peace. Or I go public with everything and watch him hang for fraud." "He'll never accept that. He'll fight. He'll accept it because the alternative is prison." Adrian looked at the burned fields, the damaged property, the evidence of his father's campaign of destruction. "He's spent my whole life teaching me that power is everything. Well, now I have power over him, and I'm going to use it." The words should have sounded triumphant. Instead, they sounded hollow, broken. Evelyn stepped closer, searching his face. "Are you all right?" "No." The admission came out rough. "I just spent 3 days digging up evidence to destroy my own father. I'm about as far from all right as it's possible to be." "Then why?" "Because he burned your fields." The words exploded out of him. "Because he's been trying to break you for months, and it's my fault, my family, my blood. If I'd stood up to him from the beginning instead of trying to play both sides—" "Stop." Evelyn grabbed his arm. "This isn't your fault. You didn't light that fire. You didn't sabotage the irrigation. You didn't spread lies in the village." "But I enabled him. For years, I watched him crush people who got in his way and told myself it was just business, just the way things worked." Adrian's eyes were haunted. "And then I met you, and I saw what he was really doing, saw it clearly for the first time. And I can't." He didn't finish, didn't need to. Evelyn understood what he couldn't say, that seeing his father through her eyes had changed something fundamental in him, had broken whatever loyalty or fear or obligation had kept him silent all these years. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We deliver an ultimatum. Together." Adrian straightened, some of the exhaustion falling away, and we make him choose between his freedom and his pride. They rode to Blackwood Estate the next morning. Evelyn had never seen the main house, had only heard descriptions of its grandeur, the sprawling manor that anchored Marcus Blackwood's empire. As they approached up the long, tree-lined drive, she understood why people spoke of it with awe. It was massive. 3 stories of gray stone with wings spreading out like a fortress. Manicured gardens surrounded it, everything precise and controlled. Servants moved like clockwork, their uniforms pristine. It was the opposite of Thornfield in every way. "Having second thoughts?" Adrian asked as they dismounted. "Hundreds. But I'm here anyway." A butler met them at the door, his expression going from professional courtesy to barely concealed shock when he recognized Adrian. "Mr. Blackwood, we weren't expecting—" "Tell my father I need to see him. Now." "He's in a meeting with—" "I don't care if he's meeting with the king. Get him." The butler fled. They waited in the entrance hall, a cavernous space with marble floors and a chandelier that probably cost more than Evelyn's entire farm. She felt acutely aware of her simple dress, her work-roughened hands, the mud still clinging to her boots despite her attempts to clean them. She didn't belong here, but then she'd never belonged in places like this, and she'd stopped trying to fit into spaces that weren't meant for her. Marcus appeared at the top of the grand staircase, flanked by two men in expensive suits who looked like lawyers or investors. His expression when he saw Adrian was pure ice. "You have 30 seconds before I have you thrown out." "Then I'll speak fast." Adrian pulled the portfolio from his coat. "I have copies of every fraudulent document you submitted to the Harrison Consortium. I have testimony from Thomas Grenville, the surveyor you fired, willing to swear you falsified the land surveys. And I have witness statements from 3 of your former tenants documenting your harassment and intimidation tactics." The color drained from Marcus's face. The two men beside him exchanged nervous glances. "You're bluffing," Marcus said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "Try me." Adrian's voice was steel. "I've already sent copies to a solicitor in London with instructions to file charges if anything happens to me, to Evelyn, or to Thornfield. You touch us again, and this goes public." "You wouldn't dare." "I already have." Adrian stepped forward. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to withdraw all claims to Thornfield. You're going to publicly apologize to Evelyn for the harassment. You're going to compensate her for the damages you've caused. The burned crops, the destroyed barn, all of it. And you're going to leave us alone. And if I refuse, then I destroy you. The Harrison Consortium will pull their investment. Your other business partners will distance themselves. And the criminal charges will put you in prison for fraud." Adrian's expression was merciless. "Your choice, Father. Your empire or your freedom." The silence in the hall was deafening. Marcus looked at his son with something that might have been hatred or might have been recognition, the acknowledgement that Adrian had learned his lessons too well. "You'd really do it," Marcus said softly. "You'd really destroy everything I've built. You tried to destroy everything Evelyn built. You tried to destroy her." Adrian's voice dropped. "So yes, without hesitation." One of the men beside Marcus cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Blackwood, perhaps we should discuss this privately." "Get out!" Marcus didn't look at him. "Both of you, leave." The men fled, their footsteps echoing on the marble floor. When they were alone, Marcus descended the stairs slowly, his gaze moving between Adrian and Evelyn. When he reached the bottom, he looked older somehow, diminished. "I underestimated you," he said finally. "Both of you." "Is that an acceptance?" Adrian asked. "It's a recognition." Marcus's jaw tightened. "You want compensation for damages? Fine. I'll have my accountant draw up a settlement. You want a public apology? I'll arrange it, and I'll stay away from your pathetic little farm." "Not good enough." Evelyn spoke for the first time, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "We also want the water rights restored, the road repaired, and a formal letter to every merchant in the village withdrawing your prohibition on trading with Thornfield." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "You're pushing your luck, girl." "My name is Evelyn Blackwood. I'm your daughter-in-law, and I'm done being intimidated by you." She stepped closer, meeting his gaze without flinching. "You tried to break me. You failed. Now you're going to fix what you destroyed, or your son makes good on his threat." For a long moment, Marcus just stared at her. Then, shockingly, he laughed, a sound without humor but with something that might have been respect. "You've got fire. I'll give you that." He turned to Adrian. "You could have married someone useful, someone who would have advanced the family interests. Instead, you chose this." "I chose someone real," Adrian said quietly. "Someone who doesn't hide behind money and power. Someone worth fighting for." Something flickered across Marcus's face, pain or regret or anger, impossible to tell. "You're both fools," he said. "But you're fools who've backed me into a corner. So fine. You'll have your settlement, your apology, your repairs. But understand this." His gaze hardened. "You're no longer my son. You get nothing from me beyond what we've agreed here. No inheritance, no family support, nothing." "I know," Adrian said. "I accepted that the moment I married Evelyn." Marcus turned away, his shoulders rigid. "Get out of my house." They left, walking out into the afternoon sun, and Evelyn felt like she could finally breathe again. They'd won. Not everything, not completely, but they'd won. The settlement arrived a week later, delivered by a grim-faced solicitor who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. £5,000 for damages, a formal letter to the village merchants, an order to the estate manager to restore the water rights and repair the roads, and a terse, impersonal apology published in the county newspaper acknowledging that certain actions taken regarding the property known as Thornfield were conducted without proper justification. It was minimal, grudging, but it was victory. Evelyn stood in the yard holding the bank draft with shaking hands, trying to process that this was real, that they'd actually forced Marcus Blackwood to back down. "We can rebuild," Adrian said beside her. "Hire workers to fix the barn, replant the fields, make it through winter." "We can survive," Evelyn agreed. Then she looked at him. "But what do you want to do? This is your life now too, your choice." Adrian was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the farm, the damaged buildings, the scorched earth, the endless work that lay ahead. "I want to make this work," he said finally. "Not just survive it, actually build something worth having, something that's ours, not his." "It won't be easy. Farming never is." "I'm starting to realize that." A slight smile. "Think you can teach a useless aristocrat how to actually work for a living?" "I taught myself. I can probably cheaply teach you." Evelyn folded the bank draft carefully. "But fair warning, I'm a terrible teacher. You're going to mess up a lot." "Good thing I'm a fast learner." They stood there together, looking at the farm that had almost destroyed them both, that had forced them into an impossible marriage, that had tested every assumption they'd ever had about themselves. And Evelyn realized something that should have terrified her but somehow didn't. She didn't want to dissolve this marriage when the threat passed, didn't want to go back to being alone. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted the possibility of building something real together. But she wasn't ready to say it out loud yet, not until she was sure he felt the same way. They hired workers from the village, men and women who'd been afraid to help before, but who came cautiously now that Blackwood's prohibition had been lifted. The barn went up first, a new structure stronger than the original. Then they replanted the fields, working from dawn to dusk alongside the hired hands. Adrian proved surprisingly capable once he stopped trying to manage and started actually doing the work. He learned to swing a hammer without hitting his thumb, to tell weeds from crops, to read the weather and adjust their plans accordingly. He failed often, got frustrated, lost his temper at stubborn fence posts and uncooperative livestock. But he kept trying. And slowly, Thornfield began to look less like a disaster zone and more like a functioning farm. Word spread about what had happened, about how Adrian Blackwood had stood against his father, how the runaway bride from London had forced one of the county's most powerful men to back down. The story got embellished in the telling, of course, growing more dramatic with each retelling. But the core truth remained. They'd fought and survived. People started treating Evelyn differently in the village, not with warmth exactly, but with a cautious respect. She was no longer just the scandal. She was the woman who'd refused to be broken. Mrs. Hewitt started visiting again, bringing supplies and gossip, and occasionally staying to help with the work. Other neighbors followed her lead, tentatively at first, then with more confidence. The isolation lifted like fog burning off in sunlight, and through it all, Evelyn and Adrian learned to exist in the same space, to work together, to anticipate each other's movements and needs. They still slept in separate rooms, still maintained the careful distance of a strategic marriage, but the distance was shrinking. 2 months after the settlement, Evelyn was in the kitchen making bread when Adrian came in looking troubled. "There's someone here to see you," he said. "From London." Her hand stilled in the dough. "Who?" "Your sister, Charlotte." Evelyn's heart stopped. She hadn't seen Charlotte since the day she'd run from the wedding, hadn't heard from any of her family. She'd assumed they'd written her off completely, wanted nothing to do with the daughter who'd destroyed their prospects. "What does she want?" "Wouldn't say. Just asked if she could speak with you." Evelyn wiped her hands on her apron with shaking fingers. "Send her in." Charlotte appeared in the doorway looking older than Evelyn remembered. She was 18 now, no longer the wide-eyed girl who'd believed in fairy tale weddings. Her dress was fashionable, but worn at the edges. Her face was thinner. "Evelyn," her voice cracked. I wasn't sure you'd see me. You're my sister. Of course I'd see you." Evelyn moved toward her, then stopped, uncertain. "How did you find me?" "Mother told me. She said you'd married some northern landowner and disappeared." Charlotte's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I had to see for myself. Had to know you were all right." "I'm all right." The words felt inadequate. "More than all right, actually. She struggled to find the right description. "I'm free." Charlotte looked around the simple kitchen, so different from the grand spaces they'd grown up in. "You live here? You work here? I built this place. With my own hands." Pride crept into Evelyn's voice despite herself. "It's mine, really mine." "But the scandal. Everyone in London still talks about what you did, about how you humiliated Lord Hastings." "Let them talk." Evelyn met her sister's eyes. "I'd rather be poor and free than wealthy and trapped. I learned that the hard way." Charlotte sank into a chair, her composure cracking. "Father's bankrupt. He lost everything trying to pay off his debts after you left. Mother blames you for all of it." "I know. I've always known she would." "They wanted me to marry Lord Hastings instead." The words came out in a rush. "Said I had to fix what you'd broken, save the family." Ice flooded Evelyn's veins. "Tell me you didn't." "I said no." Charlotte's chin lifted in a gesture so like Evelyn's own, it was startling. "I told them I wouldn't marry a man old enough to be my father just to save our social standing, and they said I could leave, that I was no longer welcome in their house if I wouldn't do my duty." "Charlotte, so I left." Her sister's hands twisted in her lap. "I have nowhere to go, no money, no prospects. But I couldn't become you. The old you. The one who almost sacrificed herself because she was too afraid to run." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. "You ran." "I ran." Charlotte laughed, the sound edged with hysteria. "And I have no idea what I'm doing or where I'm going or how to survive on my own, but I thought maybe you could teach me. Like you taught yourself?" Before Evelyn could answer, Adrian appeared in the doorway. He took in the scene. The two sisters, the emotion crackling between them, and understanding flickered across his face. "There's a spare room upstairs," he said quietly, "if you need a place to stay." Charlotte looked at him with wide eyes. "I couldn't impose your family," he said it simply, "and this house has room for one more person learning how to survive." Evelyn met his gaze across the kitchen, and something shifted between them. A silent conversation. An acknowledgement of what they were building here. Not just a farm, not just a marriage, a home, a refuge for people who'd run from cages and were learning to build lives on their own terms. "Stay," Evelyn said to her sister. "Stay as long as you need." Charlotte's composure finally broke. She stood and threw her arms around Evelyn, sobbing into her shoulder. "Thank you, thank you." Evelyn held her sister tight and looked over her shoulder at Adrian, who was watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read. But there was warmth in it, and something that looked almost like hope. That night, after Charlotte had been settled in the spare room and the house had gone quiet, Evelyn found Adrian sitting outside on the front step, looking up at the stars. She sat beside him without asking permission. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Offer her a place here." "Yes, I did. She's your sister, and she needs help." He glanced at her. "Besides, we could use another pair of hands around here. Farming's brutal." "You're getting the hang of it." "I'm getting blisters and a bad back. Not quite the same thing." But he was smiling slightly. "Your family really disowned her." "Apparently, for refusing to make the same mistake I almost made." Evelyn drew her knees up to her chest. "She's braver than I was at her age." "You were brave enough. You just needed time to realize it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the night settling around them like a blanket. "Adrian?" Evelyn said finally. "What are we doing? Really?" He turned to look at her, and in the moonlight his expression was unguarded, vulnerable. "What do you mean?" "This marriage, this farm, this..." She gestured vaguely at the space between them. We started this as a strategy, a way to survive, but it's becoming something else, isn't it? Adrian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. What do you want it to be? I don't know. The admission felt dangerous. I just know that when I think about dissolving this marriage once the threat passes, I don't want to anymore. His breath caught. You don't? No? She forced herself to look at him. Do you? Evelyn. He said her name like a prayer. I haven't wanted a temporary marriage since about the second week. Maybe since the moment I pushed you out of the way of that falling beam and realized I'd do anything, sacrifice anything, to keep you safe. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. Then what do we do? We stop pretending this is temporary. He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers threading through hers. We stop sleeping in separate rooms. We stop treating this like a business arrangement. And we see what happens when we actually try. Try what? Being married, really married, building a life together because we want to, not because we have to. His dark eyes searched hers. If you want that. If I'm not... She kissed him. It wasn't gentle or romantic or anything like the chaste brush of lips at their wedding. It was desperate and real and messy, her hands fisting in his shirt, his arms coming around her like he was afraid she might disappear. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. I'll take that as a yes, he managed. Evelyn laughed, the sound trembling with emotion and relief and something that felt dangerously like joy. You're an idiot. You're idiot, apparently. Apparently. They sat there on the front step, wrapped around each other, and watched the stars wheel overhead. Inside the house, Charlotte was sleeping safely. Around them, the farm they'd fought so hard to save breathed quietly in the night. They'd lost so much to get here. Family, fortune, the lives they thought they were supposed to live. But they'd gained something worth more than any of it, the freedom to choose, to build, to love on their own terms. And for the first time since she'd run from that altar in London, Evelyn felt something she'd thought she'd never feel again. She felt like she'd come home. Spring came to Thornfield like a promise kept. The fields that had been scorched and barren 6 months ago were now green with new growth. The experimental crops Evelyn had fought so hard to establish were thriving, their yields higher than anyone had expected. The new barn stood solid against the morning sky, its timber still fresh and bright. And inside the farmhouse, Charlotte was teaching herself to bake bread while Evelyn mended a torn work shirt and Adrian pored over agricultural journals by the fire. It was mundane, ordinary, everything Evelyn had never known she wanted. This is too much salt, Charlotte announced, staring at her dough with dismay. I can taste it already. You haven't even baked it yet, Evelyn said without looking up from her mending. I know what oversalted dough tastes like. Mother's cook always... She stopped, the old habit of referencing their previous life cutting off abruptly. Never mind, I'll start over. Or just bake it anyway and learn from the mistake, Adrian suggested. We're not entertaining royalty. Slightly salty bread won't kill us. Charlotte made a face at him, but she was smiling. In the 3 months since she'd arrived, she'd transformed from the frightened girl who'd shown up on their doorstep into someone stronger. Her hands were rough with work now. Her dresses were patched and practical. She complained less and laughed more. She was learning to survive, just like Evelyn had. The peaceful moment was interrupted by the sound of a carriage on the lane, unusual enough that all three of them looked up. Expecting anyone? Adrian asked. Evelyn shook her head, already moving toward the window. Visitors were still rare, despite the easing of tension with the village. Most people left them alone, which suited her fine, but the carriage that rolled into the yard was expensive, official-looking. And when the door opened, a man in formal attire stepped out carrying a leather case that screamed legal business. Adrian was already on his feet. Stay here, he told Evelyn. Not a chance. She followed him outside, Charlotte trailing nervously behind. The man was middle-aged, balding, with the pinched expression of someone who lived in ledgers and contracts. He looked around the farm with barely concealed distaste before focusing on Adrian. Mr. Adrian Blackwood? Yes? I'm Harold Pemberton, senior solicitor for Blackwood Estate. He pulled a document from his case. I've been authorized to deliver this to you personally. Adrian took the document, his expression hardening. Evelyn moved closer, trying to read over his shoulder. It was a summons. Marcus Blackwood was taking them to court. On what grounds? Adrian's voice was ice. Breach of contract, defamation of character, and unlawful interference with business operations. Pemberton's tone was professionally neutral. Mr. Marcus Blackwood contends that your actions have caused substantial damage to his reputation and business interests. He's seeking financial compensation and a formal retraction of all accusations made against him. This is insane, Evelyn said. We had an agreement made under duress, according to Mr. Blackwood's legal team. Pemberton sniffed. He maintains that he was coerced into signing the settlement through threats and blackmail. Adrian's laugh was bitter. Coerced, that's rich. The court date is set for 3 weeks from today. I suggest you retain counsel. Pemberton handed over another document. These are the formal charges. Good day. He climbed back into the carriage and left, dust rising in his wake. Evelyn stared at the papers in Adrian's hands, fury and fear warring in her chest. He can't do this. We have proof, which we threaten to use against him, which, legally speaking, could be construed as extortion. Adrian's jaw was tight. He's found a way to turn our leverage into a liability. So what do? We fight, again. But there was something defeated in his voice. And hope we don't lose everything this time. The next 3 weeks were a blur of preparation. They hired a solicitor, a sharp woman from York named Mrs. Eleanor Ashford, who specialized in property disputes and had a reputation for not being intimidated by wealthy men. She was expensive, cutting deep into the settlement money, but she listened to their story without judgment and immediately began building their defense. Your father is gambling, she told Adrian during their second meeting. He's betting that you won't actually expose the fraud because it would destroy him completely. That despite everything, you'll protect the family name. He'd lose that bet, Adrian said flatly. Good. Because we're going to need those documents, all of them. Mrs. Ashford's eyes were sharp. And we're going to need witnesses willing to testify about his harassment campaign. Can you get them? I can try. But trying proved harder than expected. The tenants who'd been willing to talk quietly about Marcus's tactics suddenly developed convenient amnesia when faced with the prospect of testifying in court. The surveyor who'd promised testimony disappeared, literally packed up and left the county overnight. The merchants who'd been ordered to boycott Thornfield claimed they'd never received such instructions, that it must have been a misunderstanding. Fear of Marcus Blackwood ran deeper than Evelyn had realized. They're terrified, Mrs. Hewitt said when Evelyn asked why she wouldn't testify. I'm sorry, girl. I want to help. But if I go to court against Marcus Blackwood and he wins, I'm done. He'll run me off my land, ruin what's left of my life. I can't risk it. But if we all stand together, we won't. That's the problem. The older woman's face was sad but firm. People like us, we survive by keeping our heads down, by not making waves. You and Adrian, you can afford to fight because you've already lost everything. But the rest of us, we're still trying to hold on to what little we have. Evelyn couldn't argue with that logic, even as it broke her heart. They went into court with incomplete evidence, missing witnesses, and a case that was starting to look dangerously weak. The courthouse in York was imposing, all dark wood and stern-faced portraits of judges past. The gallery was packed with spectators who'd come to watch the Blackwood family drama unfold like theater. Evelyn sat in the front row beside Charlotte, both of them wearing their best dresses, which weren't very fine compared to the society women whispering behind gloved hands. Adrian sat at the defendant's table with Mrs. Ashford, his expression carved from stone. And at the plaintiff's table sat Marcus Blackwood, flanked by 3 expensive lawyers and looking every inch the wronged patriarch. When he caught Evelyn's eye across the courtroom, he smiled, cold and cruel. The message was clear. I'm going to destroy you. The trial opened with Marcus's lead counsel, a silver-tongued man named Horace Bentley, painting a picture of a dutiful father betrayed by an ungrateful son. He spoke of Adrian's reckless marriage to a scandal-plagued woman, of baseless accusations made in anger, of a young man led astray by misplaced passion. My client has spent 30 years building an empire that provides employment for hundreds, prosperity for this region, and stability for countless families, Bentley intoned. And his own son attempted to destroy all of that over a piece of land barely worth the paper its deed is written on. This is not justice. This is revenge, and we ask the court to see it for what it is. It was a masterful performance. Half the gallery was nodding along by the time he finished. Then Mrs. Ashford stood to present their defense. She was smaller than Bentley, less polished, but when she spoke, her voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. The prosecution would have you believe this is a simple case of filial betrayal. I'm here to show you it's actually a case of documented harassment, systematic intimidation, and attempted fraud. She laid out the evidence they had, the falsified surveys, the coerced testimony from the fired surveyor who'd left town, the paper trail of Marcus's attempts to force Evelyn off her land. It wasn't complete. It had gaps, but it was real. Mr. Marcus Blackwood didn't make an honest offer to purchase Thornfield, Mrs. Ashford said. He waged a campaign to make life unbearable for the tenant until she had no choice but to leave. And when his son chose to protect his wife over protecting his father's schemes, Mr. Blackwood retaliated. That's what this court case is really about. Punishment for disloyalty. Revenge dressed up as justice. Bentley objected 3 times during her opening statement. The judge sustained 2 of them. It was going to be a long trial. The testimony dragged on for days. Marcus took the stand and played the wounded father beautifully, his voice breaking at just the right moments as he described his heartbreak over Adrian's betrayal. He denied all accusations of harassment, claiming every action taken had been legal business decisions. I offered Miss Carter, Mrs. Blackwood, fair compensation for her property, he said, looking directly at the jury. She refused. That was her right. But she and my son have twisted normal business practices into a conspiracy. It's slanderous, damaging, and entirely false. When Mrs. Ashford cross-examined him, she went for the throat. Mr. Blackwood, you claim the fire that destroyed Mrs. Blackwood's eastern field was an accident, but you were seen at the property that night. Multiple witnesses placed you there. I was checking on the damage, Marcus said smoothly. As the primary landholder in the area, I felt it was my responsibility to assess the situation. At 2 in the morning, while the fire was still burning, I heard about it and came immediately. How convenient. Mrs. Ashford pulled out a document. According to the fire marshal's report, the fire showed signs of accelerant use, lamp oil specifically, the same type of lamp oil stored in your estate's supply sheds. Lamp oil is common. That proves nothing. It proves motive and opportunity, Mr. Blackwood, which is more than you have for your accusations against my clients. The exchanges were brutal, but Marcus never cracked, never showed guilt or anger. He was too controlled, too practiced at this. Then Adrian took the stand. Evelyn's hands clenched in her lap as she watched him swear the oath. He looked exhausted, hollowed out by the stress of the trial and the weight of testifying against his own father. Mrs. Ashford walked him through their defense carefully. The discovery of the fraudulent documents, the decision to confront Marcus, the ultimatum they'd delivered. Why didn't you go to the authorities immediately? She asked. Because he's my father. Adrian's voice was quiet but steady. Despite everything, I didn't want to destroy him. I just wanted him to stop, to leave Evelyn alone, to let us live in peace. And did he stop? He sued us instead. Bentley's cross-examination was vicious. Mr. Blackwood, isn't it true that you married Evelyn Carter, a woman you barely knew, within weeks of meeting her? Yes. And isn't it true that this marriage was strategically timed to interfere with your father's property consolidation? It was timed to protect my wife from harassment. But you gained control of Thornfield through this marriage, didn't you? Control of the one property your father needed to complete his development plan. I gained a wife. The property was incidental. Was it? Bentley leaned in. Or did you see an opportunity to strike at your father and took it, using this woman as a convenient excuse? Objection! Mrs. Ashford was on her feet. Counsel is testifying, not questioning. Sustained. Mr. Bentley, ask questions. But the damage was done. The jury was looking at Adrian with suspicion now, wondering if he'd manipulated Evelyn for his own ends. When Adrian returned to their table, he was shaking. Evelyn reached for his hand under the table and squeezed hard. "You did well," she whispered. "I don't know if it's enough." Neither did she. The prosecution rested after 5 days, confident in their case. Mrs. Ashford looked grim as she prepared their final witness list. "We're missing the key testimony we need. The surveyor, the merchants, the tenants. Without them, we have documents but no people willing to say your father ordered the harassment." "What about me?" Evelyn asked. "You're too close to the case. The jury will see you as biased." "I don't care what they see. I'm the one who lived through it. Doesn't that count for something?" Mrs. Ashford studied her for a long moment. "It's a risk. Bentley will tear you apart on cross-examination. He'll dredge up your past, the scandal, everything you've tried to leave behind. Let him. I'm not afraid anymore." "Evelyn," Adrian started. "No." She turned to him. "You stood up to your father for me. You lost everything to protect me. Now it's my turn." The next morning, she took the stand. The courtroom was absolutely silent as she swore the oath. Every eye was on her. The runaway bride, the scandal, the woman who'd somehow brought down the mighty Blackwood family from within. Mrs. Ashford led her through the testimony gently, letting her tell the story in her own words. The wedding she'd fled, the isolation at Thornfield, the systematic campaign of harassment that had nearly broken her. "Mrs. Blackwood, why didn't you just leave? Sell the property and move somewhere else?" "Because I'd spent my whole life running from things that scared me, from expectations I couldn't meet, from a future I didn't want." Evelyn's voice strengthened. "Thornfield was the first place where I felt like I could breathe, like I could be myself, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. Not Marcus Blackwood, not anyone." "Even if it cost you everything?" "Especially then. Because what's the point of survival if you have to give up everything that makes you who you are?" She could see some of the jury members nodding, could feel the shift in the room. Then Bentley stood for cross-examination, and the real battle began. "Mrs. Blackwood, you claim you fled your wedding out of fear. But isn't it true that you humiliated Lord Hastings, a respected peer, in front of 300 witnesses?" "I saved myself from a marriage that would have destroyed me." "By destroying your family's reputation instead?" "My family wanted to sell me to pay their debts. I chose not to be sold." Bentley's expression hardened. "You've made quite a habit of running from your responsibilities, haven't you? Running from your wedding, running to the countryside, and now running to court with wild accusations against a man who offered you nothing but legitimate business opportunities. He burned my crops, cut off my water, tried to starve me out. Can you prove any of that? Do you have witnesses to these alleged crimes?" "I have evidence conveniently compiled by your husband, who has his own reasons for attacking his father." Bentley turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is a woman with a documented history of causing scandal, who married into wealth through questionable means, and who is now using the courts to settle personal vendettas. This isn't justice. This is manipulation." Evelyn felt her composure cracking, felt the old shame rising up, the voice that said she was nothing, that she'd always be the girl who ran, who ruined everything she touched. But then she looked at Adrian sitting at the defense table with faith written across his face. Looked at Charlotte in the gallery, her sister who'd found the courage to run because Evelyn had shown her it was possible, and she found her voice. "You're right," she said, cutting through Bentley's next question. "I did cause a scandal. I did run from my wedding. And if I had to do it over again, I'd make the same choice, because that marriage would have killed something essential in me, would have turned me into a decoration, a possession, and I'd rather be poor and free and fighting for my life in this courtroom than wealthy and dead inside." The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel for order. Evelyn kept talking, her voice rising above the chaos. "Marcus Blackwood tried to break me because I was in his way, because I was inconvenient, because people like me, people without power or money or prestigious names, aren't supposed to fight back. We're supposed to accept what we're given and be grateful for it." She looked directly at the jury. But I'm done accepting. I'm done being grateful for scraps. And I'm done pretending that men like Marcus Blackwood have the right to destroy lives just because they can. Order! The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. Mrs. Blackwood, you will answer the questions asked. I am answering. She turned to face Bentley. You asked if I have a history of causing scandal. Yes, and I'm proud of it, because every scandal I've caused has been in service of surviving, of refusing to be broken. And if that makes me unsuitable for polite society, then polite society can go to hell. The gallery gasped. Charlotte was grinning. Adrian looked torn between horror and pride, and in the jury box, Evelyn saw something shift, saw several members looking at her with recognition, with understanding, because they knew what it was like to be powerless, to be crushed by people with more money and influence, to have no recourse except stubborn survival. She'd finally spoken to them in a language they understood. Bentley tried to recover, asked more questions designed to undermine her credibility. But the damage was done. The jury had seen her not as a schemer or a gold digger, but as someone who'd fought for everything she had and refused to apologize for it. When she stepped down from the witness stand, her legs were shaking so badly she could barely walk. Adrian caught her arm, steadying her. That was either brilliant or insane, he whispered. Probably both. Mrs. Ashford looked stunned. Well, that certainly was direct. The judge called a recess. They fled to a small room reserved for counsel, and Evelyn collapsed into a chair, adrenaline finally crashing. I think I just destroyed our case, she said. Or saved it, Mrs. Ashford countered. The jury needed to see you as a real person, not a legal abstraction. You gave them that. Whether it's enough? She trailed off, shrugging. They'd find out soon enough. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Evelyn spent that time in a state of suspended terror, unable to eat or sleep, pacing the farmhouse while Charlotte tried to distract her with mundane tasks, and Adrian sat by the fire pretending to read agricultural journals. When the summons came to return to court, they rode to York in silence. The courtroom was even more packed than before, word having spread about Evelyn's testimony. She could feel the weight of all those eyes as they took their seats. The jury filed in, their faces carefully neutral. The foreman stood, a middle-aged farmer with weather-beaten skin and calloused hands. He looked at the judge and said, "We have reached a verdict, Your Honor. In the matter of Blackwood versus Blackwood, how do you find?" "We find in favor of the defendants." The courtroom exploded. Evelyn couldn't breathe, couldn't process what she'd just heard. Adrian grabbed her hand, his grip crushing, his face white with shock and relief. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order. "Furthermore," he said once the noise died down, "having reviewed the evidence presented, this court finds credible evidence of harassment and intimidation tactics employed by the plaintiff. Mr. Marcus Blackwood, you are hereby ordered to pay all court costs and to submit to a formal investigation of your business practices." Marcus was on his feet, his face purple with rage. "This is outrageous. You filed this suit, Mr. Blackwood. You subjected your son and daughter-in-law to a public trial based on dubious claims. The consequences are yours to bear." The judge's expression was stern. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell one final time. They'd won. They'd actually won. Bond. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them, a new phenomenon since word of the trial had spread to the larger newspapers. Evelyn had never been more grateful for Mrs. Ashford's ability to cut through crowds like a ship through water. "No comment," the solicitor said firmly, clearing a path. "My clients need privacy to process this verdict." They made it to the carriage and climbed in, Charlotte squeezing in beside them. As soon as the door closed, the three of them just sat there in stunned silence. "We won," Charlotte said finally. "We actually won." "Against Marcus Blackwood." Adrian's voice was hollow with disbelief. "Against my father." Evelyn looked at him, really looked at him. He didn't look triumphant. He looked lost. "Are you all right?" she asked quietly. "I don't know." He stared at his hands. "I just destroyed my father in court, publicly humiliated him, cut off any possibility of reconciliation, and I—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "I don't regret it. That's what scares me. I don't regret it at all." Because he tried to destroy us first, Evelyn said. You protected your family. There's no shame in that. My family, Adrian's eyes met hers. You and Charlotte, not him. Yes. He nodded slowly, something settling in his expression. Then I can live with what I've done. The carriage rolled out of York, heading north toward home, toward Thornfield, toward the life they'd fought so hard to protect. And for the first time in months, Evelyn felt like she could finally breathe all the way down to her bones. News of the verdict spread through the county like wildfire. Within a week, Marcus Blackwood had withdrawn from public life entirely, retreating to his estate while investigators combed through his business records. The Harrison Consortium pulled their investment. Several of his business partners quietly dissolved their associations. His empire didn't collapse overnight, but it was crumbling at the edges. And at Thornfield, life went on. The spring planting was in full swing. The experimental crops were showing promise. Charlotte had finally mastered bread making and moved on to attempting cheese. The new chickens were laying well. It was ordinary, mundane, perfect. One evening, about a month after the trial, Evelyn was in the garden when she heard horses approaching. She looked up to see Mrs. Hewitt riding up the lane, followed by several other tenant farmers. Her heart sank. Had something gone wrong? Was there new trouble? But when Mrs. Hewitt dismounted, she was smiling. Heard you might need help with the late planting, the older woman said. Thought we'd come offer our hands. Behind her, the other farmers nodded. There were 5 of them, people who'd been too afraid to testify, too scared to help when Marcus's power had seemed absolute. I don't understand, Evelyn said. You stood up to him. You won. Mrs. Hewitt's expression was fierce. You showed the rest of us it was possible. The least we can do is help you actually succeed now that you've got breathing room. One of the other farmers stepped forward, a young man named Thomas, who worked the land east of Thornfield. We pooled some resources, bought seed stock and some equipment we thought you might need. Consider it a thank you. For what? For proving that people like us can fight back and win. His grin was infectious. That's worth more than gold, Mrs. Blackwood. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Just put us to work. These fields won't plant themselves. They worked until sunset, a dozen people turning Thornfield's fields into something that looked less like a struggling farm and more like a real agricultural operation. Adrian joined them, his inexperience showing but his determination unwavering. Charlotte brought out bread and cheese and fresh cider, playing hostess with a grace their mother would never have recognized. And when the work was done and everyone gathered in the yard to share the simple meal Charlotte had prepared, Evelyn looked around at the community that had finally accepted them and felt something she'd thought lost forever. She felt like she belonged. Boom. That night, after everyone had left and Charlotte had gone to bed, Evelyn and Adrian sat on the front step watching the stars. We did it, she said softly. We actually built something real here. We did. Adrian's arm was around her shoulders, solid and warm. Though I'm not sure I can take much credit, you're the one who knew how to farm. You're the one who stood up to your father, who protected this place when it would have been easier to walk away. I protected you, the place was incidental. Liar. But she was smiling. You love this farm almost as much as I do now. I love the life we've built here. He pressed a kiss to her temple. That's different. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the night settling around them like a benediction. Adrian? Evelyn said finally. When I ran from that wedding, from Hastings, I thought I was running away from everything, from responsibility, from family, from the life I was supposed to have. You were. But I was also running towards something. I just didn't know it yet. She turned to look at him. I was running toward this, toward you, toward the possibility of actually choosing my own life instead of accepting what was chosen for me. Adrian's expression was soft in the starlight. I'm glad you ran, even though it cost you everything, even though it nearly destroyed us both. I'm glad. So am I. He kissed her then, slow and deep and real. Not the strategic kiss at their wedding or the desperate kiss on the front step months ago. This was the kiss of 2 people who'd chosen each other, fought for each other, and built something worth having together. When they finally pulled apart, Evelyn rested her head on his shoulder and looked out at the farm, their farm, spread out before them in the moonlight. "What do you think happens next?" she asked. "I don't know. More planting, more harvests, probably more disasters that we'll have to survive together." He sounded amused. "Why? Having second thoughts?" "Never. I spent so long fighting for survival that I'm not sure what to do with actual peace. We live in it. We build on it. We create the life we want instead of the life we were told to want." Adrian's arm tightened around her. "And we do it together, however messy or imperfect or complicated it gets." "Together," Evelyn echoed. "I like the sound of that." They sat there on the front step until the stars began to fade and dawn crept over the horizon, painting the fields in shades of gold and green. And as the sun rose on Thornfield, on their home, their refuge, their hard-won sanctuary, Evelyn felt something settle deep in her chest. Not the end of struggle, not the promise that everything would be easy from here on out, but the certainty that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. She'd run from one life and built another with her own hands and heart and stubborn will. She'd married a stranger who'd become her partner, her ally, her love. She'd fought one of the most powerful men in the county and won. And now, finally, she could stop running. She was home. Yigged. 6 months later, Charlotte stood at the altar of the village church, in a simple white dress, holding the hand of Thomas, the young farmer who'd helped plant their fields and who'd fallen completely in love with her fierce determination and terrible cooking. Evelyn watched from the front pew with tears in her eyes, remembering the terror of her own wedding day. But Charlotte wasn't running. She was choosing, beaming with joy as she said her vows to a man who loved her for exactly who she was. "She's happy," Adrian murmured beside her. "She's free," Evelyn corrected. "There's a difference." After the ceremony, there was a celebration at Thornfield, not the grand society affair their mother would have demanded, but a genuine party with neighbors and farmers and the people who'd become their community. Mrs. Hewitt brought her famous preserves. The village baker contributed a massive cake. Someone brought a fiddle, and people danced in the yard as the sun set. It was chaotic and loud and imperfect and beautiful. Marcus Blackwood was not invited. According to the rumors, he'd sold off half his holdings and moved to London, unable to face the disgrace of his court loss and the investigation that had revealed years of questionable business practices. Evelyn should have felt triumphant about his fall. Instead, she mostly felt tired. Revenge didn't taste as sweet as survival. "Any regrets?" Adrian asked as they watched Charlotte dance with her new husband. Evelyn considered the question, thought about everything she'd lost. Her family name, her place in society, the life of ease she'd been raised to expect. Then she looked around at the farm she'd built, the community she'd earned the respect of, the man beside her who'd sacrificed everything to stand with her. "Not a single one," she said. And she meant it. Because she'd learned something essential on this journey, that freedom wasn't about avoiding hardship or finding an easy path. Freedom was about choosing which battles to fight and who to fight them alongside. She'd chosen Adrian, chosen Thornfield, chosen a life that demanded everything from her but gave her something priceless in return, the ability to look at herself in the mirror and recognize the person looking back. She was Evelyn Carter Blackwood, the runaway bride who'd built a farm and fought an empire and won. The woman who'd proven that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about being terrified and fighting anyway. And as the stars came out over Thornfield and the celebration continued around her, she took Adrian's hand and pulled him onto the makeshift dance floor, laughing as he stumbled over his own feet. They danced badly, joyfully, without grace or elegance. They danced like people who'd survived the impossible and come out the other side. They danced like they were home,